Der Verlust von nutzbarem Boden in den Trockenzonen der Erde, die sogenannte Desertifikation, ist ein globales Problem und hat dramatische Dimensionen erreicht. Mehr als ein Drittel der landwirtschaftlich nutzbaren Flächen der Erde, im Bild rot markiert, sind gefährdet oder betroffen. In den Trockengebieten der Erde bedroht Desertifikation mehr als 2 Milliarden Menschen. Das ist ein Drittel der Weltbevölkerung. Die Hälfte von ihnen lebt schon heute in Armut. Nahezu Gesamtaustralien ist von Desertifikation bedroht. Große Teile Süd- und Zentralasiens und Chinas, die Region um das Mittelmeer, weite Landstriche in Nord- und Südamerika. Es trifft vor allem die Randgebiete der großen Wüsten der Erde. Aber auch dort, wo nie eine Wüste war, entstehen Wüsten neu. Jedes Jahr verödet eine Fläche doppelt so groß wie Österreich. Am stärksten betroffen ist Afrika, wo bereits 3/4 der landwirtschaftlich nutzbaren Fläche bedroht sind. Der Verlust von nutzbarem Boden in den Trockenzonen der Erde, die sogenannte Desertifikation, ist ein globales Problem und hat dramatische Dimensionen erreicht. Mehr als ein Drittel der landwirtschaftlich nutzbaren Flächen der Erde, im Bild rot markiert, sind gefährdet oder betroffen. In den Trockengebieten der Erde bedroht Desertifikation mehr als 2 Milliarden Menschen. Das ist ein Drittel der Weltbevölkerung. Die Hälfte von ihnen lebt schon heute in Armut. Nahezu Gesamtaustralien ist von Desertifikation bedroht. Große Teile Süd- und Zentralasiens und Chinas, die Region um das Mittelmeer, weite Landstriche in Nord- und Südamerika. Es trifft vor allem die Randgebiete der großen Wüsten der Erde. Aber auch dort, wo nie eine Wüste war, entstehen Wüsten neu. Jedes Jahr verödet eine Fläche doppelt so groß wie Österreich. Am stärksten betroffen ist Afrika, wo bereits 3/4 der landwirtschaftlich nutzbaren Fläche bedroht sind.
Hi guys, it is an absolutely spectacularly gorgeous day here in the end times in South Austin, Texas on Wednesday morning, December the 9th, 2015, December the 9th, 2015, where we are heading to 75 degrees today and we will hit in the 80s tomorrow on December 10th. Which is essentially the same forecast for Austin, Texas, the next few days as it is for St. Croix in the Virgin Islands, where I am heading to get away from the winter chill. The joke is on, you're all clueless moron once again. So I cannot think of a better day than this hot, sweaty summer day in December to bring you my weekly climate change meltdown roundup rant, where I go on the pages of the mainstream media to see how this planet is descending directly into a burning lake of fire while these global leaders, these little puppets of the fossil fuel industry over there in Paris, jacking off, trying to make one person on this planet believe they're doing one goddamn thing to save this planet from climate change or anything else. Anyway, so I'm trying to steer away from just talking about those jack-offs over there in Paris and look a little bit behind the scenes. And good Lord, am I going to give the bullshit detector button a workout in this rant? And I could burn out the batteries just on this one story. Several versions of this story on the top. 100 stories on the planet just being played completely straight by the mainstream media. So I just chose Reuters news versions. African nations, meaning sub-Saharan African nations, aim to restore 250 million acres of land by 2030. This is in the next 15 years. 10 African countries have committed to restore about 75 million acres of degraded and deforested land under a new push to make about 250 million acres of farmland productive again by 2030. So I'm trying to disentangle this complicated. So I guess what they're saying here is that 250 million acres of once productive farmland have been turned pretty much into desert. And as part of reversing that trend, these 10 sub-Saharan African countries have committed at these Paris talks to restoring, I guess, around 75 million acres of deforested land in the next 15 years. The scheme, launched on Sunday in Paris, will be backed by $1 billion from the World Bank and additional funds from Germany, as well as $545 million in private sector investment. So we're getting ready as a planet, I guess, to give these basically these planet eaters, these nibblers and eaters over there in Africa, $1.5 billion. I guess if you call putting in new lawns and gardens in around the mansions of these corrupt dictators over there in sub-Saharan Africa, I guess restoring African dictators' lawns and gardens in their mansions, restoring degradation of deforested land in Africa. $1.5 billion getting in this grab bag, in this little Santa Claus gift from the UN and the World Bank. Let's hear from Rwanda's Minister of Natural Resources, Vincent Biruta. Take it away. Just the very concept of Rwanda having a Minister of Natural Resources. Am I the only person on the planet thinking that this... Anyway, let's hear from... Take it away, Mr. Biruta. Quote, restoring our landscapes brings prosperity, security, and opportunity. I can't even deal with it.
Oh, come on now, that ain't even bullshit. That's horseshit.
I can't even finish it. So what are the companies? The companies, listen to me. Listen to me. The companies. The countries joining up to reach their hands into this $1.5 billion that we're pissing away, taking part. How about the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Ethiopia, Kenya, Liberia, Madagascar, Malawi, Niger, Rwanda, Togo, and Uganda. One more quote from Henry Jombo, Republic of Congo's forest economy minister, the forest economy minister of the Congo saving the planet. Quote, if the Congo Basin is not well managed, the land will become degraded and turned into grassland, and then the desert will take over the whole of Africa. And nobody should know more about that subject than the forest economy minister responsible for the second biggest rainforest on the planet. But anyway, as long as I've got the bullshit detector button, it is deja vu all over again. Again, the several stories on this one. CO2 emissions set for historic fall in 2015, study says.
Warning, bullshit alert.
So where have we heard this this prediction for the historic fall of CO2 emissions? I think it was pretty much a year ago. Probably this rant 1 year ago when the mainstream media spitting out this unadulterated horseshit. I was pressing the bullshit button then, as a bunch of other people were. And then what did we find out about 6 months ago? Oops! A little bit of a problem here because of the self-reporting of this data from these countries, especially China. Maybe CO2 emissions did not fall in 2014. And here we have pretty much the same headline with 2014 being changed for 2015. Let's go ahead and read the first couple of paragraphs before I get the bullshit. But alright. Emissions of carbon dioxide from fossil fuels, the main driver of man-made climate change, are set to decline this year for the first time in a period of global economic growth, said a study on Monday. The quote, surprising, otherwise known as unadulterated horseshit findings were published as 195 nations entered the final phase of UN talks in Paris. Thanks mainly to changes in China, the worldwide growth in emissions from fossil fuels derived energy flattened in 2014. And is set to drop this year.
Bullshit detected. Take precautions,
said the study in the journal Nature Climate Change. So anyway, thanks mainly to changes in China. So let's go over there to China. Again, many stories on this one. I just picked one of I don't know how many stories. This one from some group called The Verge. Beijing issues first ever red alert for severe air pollution. So thanks to changes in China, Beijing issues first ever red alert for severe air pollution. On Monday, the Chinese city of Beijing issued its first ever red alert for air pollution, meaning officials have forecasted more than 3 consecutive days of severe smog for the area. The alert, which was upgraded from orange, will stay in effect through Thursday. Yes. During that time, outdoor construction will come to a halt. Half of the city's vehicles will be banned from the roads, and many schools will close. So I guess these air pollution indicators are between, what are they? Anyway, what is the level? This article is so badly written, you cannot even, it makes you do the math yourself to figure out how bad the pollution is. So then, alright, so let's see, we have the headline, Beijing issues first ever red alert for severe air pollution. Then you get down to the 6th paragraph to find the sentence, this is not the first time a Chinese city has declared a red alert for air pollution. I guess it was some other city. Anyway, guys, the point I'm making is if anybody on this planet believes for 1 minute that China, that goddamn China, stories in here that China is poised to be the country of China will be emitting 1/2 of the planet's CO2 emissions before long. Anybody who thinks for 1 minute that China is doing a goddamn thing to save this planet from global warming, you got one thing to tell you, you clueless moron.
Bullshit level, DEFCON 5.
Although I don't have any concern that anybody on Humpty Dumpty Tribe is believing that unadulterated horse shit. All right. That's what's going on in China while these jackoffs over there at COP21 are saving the planet. What is going on in Greenland while that bullshit's going on over there in China? In Paris. Greenland's glaciers are melting faster than ever. In the past century, the glaciers of Greenland have melted at least 2 times faster than they have melted at any other time in nearly 10,000 years, according to a new study. The reason, said lead researcher William Deandra, is increased carbon dioxide in the atmosphere from the burning of fossil fuels. So this new study offers new proof that glaciers can grow and shrink rapidly over decades and centuries rather than hundreds or thousands of years in response to temperature changes. And the findings could help scientists better forecast how fast and how much sea levels will rise due to global warming in the coming decades. So that's what's going on in Greenland, and kind of in league with that, this interesting story. I've actually been planning a rant about this very subject, and here it is showing up on Reuters News today. Climate change naysayers better at war of words, study finds. climate change opponents, I love that term, climate change opponents are better at spreading their unadulterated horseshit point of view than those who see climate change as real and troublesome, according to a study underlining the challenge of rallying public support. The naysayers did well at changing the minds of both liberal and conservative Americans in a study of about 1,600 U.S. adults conducted by Michigan State University. And so here's what they did. So in the study, they fabricated news articles. These researchers fabricated news articles about climate change. Half of the articles had, quote, positive messages, realistic messages about what was going on with the climate, while the other half were negative, suggesting that climate change is exaggerated. And when they boiled the study down, the positive messages had little or no effect on the participants' core beliefs about climate change, while the negative messages prompted participants to doubt climate change's existence. The study illustrates the influence of climate change opponents in the United States. So I was just this story on the melting glaciers in Greenland brought this to mind. I was going to, so whenever you read one of these climate change stories, I don't know, it's really a fascinating phenomenon when you go on every single climate change story now. This machine of these clueless morons, where there will be anywhere from 10 to 1,000, depending on how big of the story and the play the story is getting, anywhere from 10 to 1,000 of these unadulterated, bullshit, clueless morons. This has to be funded somewhere. That, at some point it defies all logic. The amount of cluelessness, and that not only do you have the comment, but then you have the thumbs up and the thumbs down to the comment. So there will be like anywhere from 10 to 100 thumbs up about the comments and no thumbs down. It's really a fascinating phenomenon. I could do a whole rant about it. I just picked, this is one comment, this clueless moron going on there talking about how climatologists are claiming that sea ice, not glacier melt on land, but how all of these climatologists and these global warming alarmists talking about how melting sea ice is going to raise global sea levels, and they talk about any third grader can put ice cubes in a glass of water. The ice cubes melt in the glass of water. It doesn't rise. So he's pointing out that as how all climate change news is bullshit, because that is, and said all of these thumbs up from this clueless moron. And I pointed out to the guy, which of course had no effect on him, I'm quite sure, that there is not one climatologist on this planet suggesting that melting sea ice is raising sea levels. They are saying ice on land, glaciers on land melting, and that fresh water running off of dry land into the water is raising sea levels. The melting sea ice is just an indication of the global warming and is easier to measure than the loss of what's going on the dry land. These climate change deniers have zero interest in looking at nuance and subtlety. It is completely out of a climate change denier's brain power to understand the difference between melting sea ice and melting land ice. They are morons. Anybody who cannot make this little connection in their brain and claiming that any climatologist on this planet. But anyway, let me move along. I got two more stories. What is, I try to keep politics out of this, but what is Bernie Sanders? Bernie Sanders, who has about as much chance to win the presidency of the United States as Kiribati has to be on this planet 100 years from now. But anyway, as long as Bernie Sanders is whacking off, how about this story? You go, Bernie, from Reuters News. Sanders unveils climate plan to end U.S. oil and nuclear dependence. U.S. Democratic presidential hopeful Bernie Sanders unveiled his climate change plan on Monday that seeks to end our country's dependence on oil, coal, and nuclear energy, and could pressure party frontrunner Hillary Clinton. Yes, so Sanders' plan would ban oil and gas lobbyists from working in the White House. It would end new fossil fuel lease sales on public lands and would cut carbon emissions faster in coming decades than the unadulterated horseshit goals set by President Barack Obama's clean power plans. Quote from Sanders, "It is time for a political revolution that takes on the fossil fuel billionaires, accelerates our transition to clean energy, and finally puts people before the profits of polluters." Anybody on this planet who believes that the fossil fuel industry which runs this planet is going to let Bernie Sanders get in the White House, I got one thing to tell you.
Oh, come on now. That ain't even bullshit. That's horse shit.
And I couldn't leave without one story from COP21. I'm surprised it took this long for this story to come out from AP. Climate hosts take steps to limit their carbon footprint in Paris talks. Talking about cutting carbon emissions sure puts out a lot of carbon. That is the irony of drawing in 40,000 people, including heads of state, negotiators, activists, and journalists, to Paris to hash out what is hoped will be a groundbreaking international agreement to put a brake on global warming. So, what are they doing? Let's see, somewhere in here, this is a story about what they're... Okay, here we go, finally, and about the 6th paragraph. To counter this and to ensure that COP21 is, quote, carbon neutral. Organizers are taking a variety of measures to offset COP21's carbon emissions. Okay. Among these is the construction of a 2,000-seat assembly hall made from wood from sustainably managed forests.
Warning, bullshit alert.
After the conference, the assembly hall can be dismantled and reused. Okay. Catering for COP21 has been outsourced to 2 companies that guaranteed to abide by sustainability guidelines.
That was bullshit.
In addition, the hotels putting these people up will plant trees to offset the emissions represented by every whole hotel night in Paris during the 2-week conference.
Bullshit detected. Take precaution.
And I love this one because I agree with it. Many of the flights that these planet eaters are taking to Paris, many of the flights to and from Paris scheduled during the conference would have happened anyway. So it is hard to separate out how much of those air transport emissions are due to the conference itself. And that is exactly, every time I get on an airplane, I get get my little trolls calling me a goddamn hypocrite because I get on an airplane like I'm getting ready to do to St. Croix in a few days, and I point out in somewhat defense of myself, the airplane will be going to St. Croix whether or not I am on the airplane. This is just one more example of the absolute futility of thinking you can do a goddamn thing to save the planet from climate change by not getting on an airplane, you clueless moron. As long as there are airplanes flying back and forth all over this planet, the airplane is going to St. Croix, with or without Hambone. Anyway, guys, I have got to wrap up this climate change meltdown roundup rant and get out and enjoy this absolutely spectacularly gorgeous 75-degree hot sunny day in December, selling Christmas trees to clueless morons. So for this week's edition of my climate change meltdown roundup rant, bye guys.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ricardo Melendez-Ortiz. I'm the head of the International Center for Trade and Sustainable Development. It's a great pleasure for me to be here with all of you and to welcome you to this session. This is a session that we thought we would like to organize sort of in the follow-up to Paris and the climate change negotiations, because we were very impressed by the commitment of the international community, which is already very well established in that Paris Agreement that resulted there, to bring about change towards mitigation of climate change and so on, but using particularly clean energy technologies. And in those commitments, both sort of the institutional as well as announcements that were made during the COP21, Africa was always very high in people's minds. So that's just to explain why we're doing the panel. It's a panel that we have organized sort of last minute, to be honest. And so I'd like to thank our panelists for responding with such short notice to this invitation. We have decided to frame the panel around this new initiative of the Africa Renewable Energy Initiative, which was launched by heads of state and by NEPAD, the African Development Bank, the African Group of Negotiators, UNEP, and IRENA, the International Renewable Energy Agency, because we thought it represented perhaps the most interesting illustration of how much commitment there is. The session, however, is not necessarily going to focus on the initiative. The session would like to really focus on the challenge that we're facing, and therefore, the initiative's potential, but rather, okay, so how do we go about confronting this challenge? So just a few words very quickly to frame the panel and the debate that we will have. As you know, in Africa, we have that situation of lack of access to energy, energy poverty, so basically very low levels of consumption of energy per capita, as well as obviously the opportunity to contribute to the efforts against climate change, which altogether are a very good reason, a terribly compelling reason, to promote renewable energies. As I said before, sometimes when I talk about renewable energies and energy, I think it's sort of a blessing that the climate change agenda has allowed that so much attention and resources are paid to this. By the same token, is really, in a way, inexcusable that more hasn't been done before. But so let's look at on the positive side of this. And even though Africa contributes really in a very small portion to global warming, again, let's take the opportunity to do something about it, and at the same time do something about what is most urgent and most important in Africa, which is overcoming energy poverty. Indeed, there's an International Energy Agency report launched recently, which calls Africa the epicenter of the global challenge to overcome energy poverty, and which estimates annual electricity consumption per capita in Africa in 2012 at around 600 kilowatts hour. This is including South Africa, but Sub-Saharan Africa, excluding South Africa, we're talking about 162 kilowatts hour. 162 kilowatt hour, to put it in relative terms, to understand what that means that a Tanzanian, in average, would take about 8 years to consume as much as an American or a North American consumes in about a month. So the average in the developed world is about 7,000 kilowatts per hour. So you're talking about really a huge difference in the consumption per capita, and that's what we refer to as energy poverty. This initiative of the African Renewable Energy Initiative speaks about adding 10 gigawatts of new renewable energy generation capacity by 2020 and up to 300 gigawatts of energy generation by renewables by 2030. So it's really a huge improvement on what we have currently, which is at around 90 gigawatts of electricity for the whole region. So we're saying that adding 10 and then up to 300 by 2030. Sub-Saharan Africa is also, which is a piece of data that I'm very concerned about, the only region in the world where the number without access to the number of people without access to electricity is set to rise rather than to decrease if we continue in a business as usual pathway. So by 2030, Africa's share of the world's population without electricity may increase without this sort of attention and action from less than half today to more than 2/3 of the population. With the demographics that we have in front of us, this means it's a very worrisome prospect. The idea of this African Renewable Energy Initiative is therefore to bring additional electricity that will cover the needs of 640 million Africans on the continent. So again, that's a very good reason to pay attention to it. I don't have to explain about how energy is connected to every economic activity today, and therefore the critical importance of energy to overcome poverty, generally speaking, and for any of the development prospects of Africa. Dr. Adesina, the former Minister of Agriculture of Nigeria, currently President of the African Development Bank, estimates that the continent loses about 4% in terms of GDP annually because of the lack of access to energy. That's really a huge amount, 4% of GDP per year for the whole continent. So let's just move to the panel. The reason we wanted to do this as well is because ICTSD has been organizing efforts in the past 10 years, more or less now, to promote a scale-up of renewable energies, and to do so by using the multilateral framework on trade, but also other arrangements, other type of arrangements for trade and investment in the world. So we have proposed what we call a sustainable energy trade agreement. We have also proposed what we call a sustainable energy trade initiative, and have been working on this for a number of years, where we have looked at the frameworks on trade and investment, look at how those policies have an impact on the possibilities of this scale-up. And we have made proposals to ensure that we have global markets that will deliver the needs that we have at the global level in terms of renewable energy. Again, back to climate. In the Paris Agreement, there are commitments that will require a very significant scale-up of renewable energies worldwide. And countries have proposed that they will be putting in place policies to increase the mix of renewable energies in their own countries, most countries, if not all, countries of the world. And so what we're facing again is a situation where we need the policy frameworks to be supportive of what is expected to be a really massive investment and a massive effort to scale up renewable energies. So it's not only in Africa that that's happening. Now, the good news for the region, in a way, is that as opposed to other parts of the world, and that's for very specific reasons, the cost of renewable energies, and specifically when it comes to solar photovoltaic, for example, is very competitive in this region. And it is very competitive. It's at 10 cents kilowatt, 10 cents of dollar kilowatt worldwide, which is expensive in most parts of the world. But in this region, it's competitive because the cost of generating electricity here using fuel, particularly, is terribly high. So diesel generation is at about 30 cents per kilowatt, and in the Congo, for instance, it's up to 90 cents per kilowatt. So it's so in those terms, the proposal of scaling up renewable energies with the technologies that we have today, with the phenomenon that we had in the past few years, where costs have been going down in a very significant manner, it's very advantageous for the region. Last thing I mentioned is that one of the forms of renewable energy is hydro, and that's counted as clean energy. But we also know the kind of constraints and the problems that come with hydro, including more and more with the situation of climate change, the insecurity that you have again on watersheds and rivers and hydro. So you go through droughts and you go to wetter seasons that are affecting already in many other regions in the world their reliance on hydro. And so again, therefore, it's very interesting now to have the opportunity to work with technologies that are more affordable. So with that, I'll turn to the panel, and I'm sorry if I took a bit of time to introduce the subject. We had expected to be joined by Minister Wanat Katui from Zambia, but I think she's late. Oh, okay, because she's at the conference center, and so she may or not be able to join us. So should we start with you, Ingrid, perhaps? Okay. So we start with Ingrid, and then we go. Ingrid is the program manager of the Program on Climate Change and Energy at ICTSD, and she's been working on these issues now for a number of years. She came before from the Commerce Collegium in the National Board of Trade in Sweden, and has focused, as I said before, on this campaign that ICTSD has been leading on sustainable energy trade. So, Ingrid.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. So I'll be presenting some findings from parts of the research that we have been conducting in ICTSD. In particular, we've been looking at how trade policy can play a role for enhancing energy access in Africa. As we heard here in the introductory remarks, the situation when it comes to energy access in Africa is very serious. About 621 million people in Africa lack access to electricity, of which sub-Saharan Africa alone accounts for the majority. The electrification rate for Africa as a whole in 2013 was 43%, and with only 26% in rural areas. The electrification rate in sub-Saharan Africa was only 32% and only 17% in rural areas. And 4 out of 5 rely on biomass for cooking, which is responsible for as many as 600,000 people dying every year of household air pollution, half of them being children under the age of 5. So this obviously needs to be addressed urgently for many reasons. As Ricardo mentioned, there can be no growth, no development without access to energy. But there is also the additional benefits of moving to clean energy from the health benefits and so on. So the good news is that in Africa there is an enormous potential for clean energy. Expanding traditional grid is a time-consuming and very capital-intensive process. And providing energy access to rural and remote populations is particularly challenging. And this is why clean energy constitutes a valuable option, because there are very interesting off-grid technologies available, which means that you don't have to expand the grid. So these off-grid solutions include solar lamps, solar cooking stoves, but also mini-grids and so on. So a parallel can be drawn to mobile phones. Before the mobile phones were available, people sometimes had to travel quite far to just make a simple phone call. And nowadays, thanks to the mobile phones, people actually have access to phones very easily, and they were managed to leapfrog the development. So a similar development can be envisioned in the area of clean energy. So looking at the trade angle of clean energy, if we look at applied tariffs, so tariffs is the most tangible trade policy, and applied tariffs on solar panels are actually zero for most sub-Saharan African countries. But exceptions include Mozambique applying a tariff of 7.5%, Cameroon 10%, Democratic Republic of Congo 10%, and Gabon 10%. There are also a few countries applying a bit lower tariffs: Ghana, Madagascar 5%, and Morocco 2.5%. There's one exception, which is Djibouti, applying tariffs of 26% on solar panels. So overall, import-related costs could be further reduced for those who apply higher tariffs. And just a parallel could be drawn to most OECD countries, which import these goods duty-free thanks to the concessions under the Information Technology Agreement. Looking at technologies that are more directly relevant for energy access, like inputs into solar mini-grid systems, well, here we see that the tariffs are actually even higher, ranging from 10 to 25% in most African countries. And the case is the same for solar lamps, where applied tariffs also range between 10 and 25%. So if tariffs is the most tangible trade policy and trade barrier, there are also a number of other policies that contribute to keeping the costs of these technologies high. Non-tariff barriers, for instance, should be mentioned, but also taxes. There are taxes in many African countries that increase the final product price. And the price of the component used in solar systems, for instance, account for about 50% of the final product price. So a tax can actually make quite a big difference. And what we have seen is that even when taxes are being removed, there is a communication gap, which means that the customs officials sometimes actually continue to collect the tax. Looking at import of energy access goods to Africa, we've seen that most solar portable light manufacturers are headquartered in Asia. China and India account for a large share of manufacturers of solar portable lights, but actually a lower share of sales in Africa. There is actually a strong north-south bias in trade, with 50% of the solar portable lights coming from Europe, North America, Australia, and Japan. And this can be explained by many factors. One is the distance. There's a shorter shipping distance, at least from Europe to many African countries. But there is also a quality consideration and a perception that there is a higher quality of goods coming from those countries. Most exporters and importers, actually, of non-electrical lamps and lighting fittings, including solar lamps, are in OECD and in developing countries. And the same is the case for PV cells and modules, where most importers are in the OECD and large emerging economies. South Africa is the only major importer of PV cells and modules in Africa, but there are also a few LDCs like Mali, Senegal, and Tanzania who have relatively high import values. So, just to conclude, based on these pieces of information, I think that it's very clear that expanding access to energy, will involve an important role for trade policy. But it would need to go beyond addressing tariffs and also addressing non-tariff barriers, taxes, and so on. One additional important item that I would like to mention is fossil fuel subsidies. I had a phone call a few weeks ago with a company who produces solar lamps for Africa, and they focus a lot in Tanzania. And they said that they had done these market studies and market surveys of other countries with similar conditions and similar climatic conditions and so on. But they have been unable to really position themselves in the markets of many countries because these countries subsidize kerosene lamps. So fossil fuel subsidies really plays a role as well. Just a last word. So the focus of this session today is energy access. But I would just like to highlight that, because many African countries don't have any own manufacturing capacity for the moment. So African countries would need to rely on imports. But actually importing the goods comes with generating domestic jobs. Because many of the renewable energy technologies, the clean energy technologies, they include a large chunk of services for installation, maintenance, operation, and so on. And most of these services actually need to be sourced locally. So I think that there's a triple opportunity here to using trade policy to enhance energy access, and with that would come the benefits of improved health, growth, development, and so on. But it would also possibly stimulate the generation of local jobs, and it goes without saying to contribute to addressing climate change. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ingrid. That's a very good overview of the issue and the challenges and that are faced in Africa. It's also a good introduction of why trade policy and the frameworks matter. So let me, with that, turn quickly then to Eugene Jernigan. And Eugene is the trade and development leader at Action Green for Trade and Sustainable Development in Kenya. And I understand you also work on regional integration and trade. So, Eugene.
Thank you. Thank you, ICTSD, for inviting me. I really appreciate. I also want to mention that I work also for CATS International. I do a lot of research with CATS International. When I was given this assignment by ICT, it was on a short notice, but of course we're there, and I really appreciate so much. We are all excited, especially with the African Renewable Energy Initiative, plans to develop at least 10 gigawatts of new renewable energy generation capacity by 2020, and at least 300 gigawatts by 2030, potentially making the continent the cleanest in the world, is in the right direction to deal with African energy problems and shortfall. So I'm sure that is a very exciting news for us all. We also applaud the world leaders for affirming and coming with those commitments. I can mention like U.S. Secretary General Ban Ki-moon has supported the initiative, and I can quote him saying that Africa is particularly vulnerable to the effects of climate change. So, and here in Kenya, because also our focus in Kenya about renewable energies, we have a Cabinet Secretary for Environment, Judy Wakungu, who also mentioned that, we are ready to engage in massive solar and wind energy production to attain 100% electricity reach for our people. So you can see the trend there that our leaders are in it for, renewable energy. Of course, even in our Constitution, Vision 2030, there's that aspect of having issues of energy access for people. I like Ingrid's statistics that she has given to us, and for sure reflect what is happening to us in Kenya. Of course, we face a lot of challenges, and when you don't have energy access, there's which hinders competitiveness of our country by raising the cost of doing business. So our government is so focused in energy, and of course renewable energy, and of course we know that no country can develop without energy, and developing countries for us in Kenya, most are poor in energy. So it's important for our leaders to look into our people in the countryside, our counties who are facing these difficulties. I also must mention that even as the people also work in the grassroots, we want to challenge our leaders to bring out the issues of energy, because we have the urban poor, who are people living, for example, in Nairobi, and they don't access electricity, for example. So they use some of the things Ingrid mentioned, tin lamp, and in a small house where, and you can imagine health issues, Of course, in recent studies, energy is actually in Africa, and especially also in Kenya, energy supply is heavily and unsustainably dependent upon hydroelectric power and rapid energy. Demand growth means that Kenya must find new ways of, meeting the target for, and of course, renewable energy is the way to go. I can give us some statistics about Kenya. Of course, the country possesses bountiful wind, solar, small hydro, biomass, geothermal potential. For example, Kenya has nearly 700 megawatts geothermal potential, enough to beat around 3 times Kenya annual energy use. But of course, we haven't reached that target, Of course, just give a few statistics about Kenya. Of course, and again, I can say that Kenya has access financing for its energy use, but we know that that's outside source. But recently we've been talking about financing for development, and it's what we need even in Africa, in Kenya, thinking of internally, resource mobilization, in terms of having funds internally. There are many ways we can raise funds here to support energy access. I can say quick facts. Population of Kenya 2011 was 41.6 million. Currently installed geothermal capacity is 200 megawatts, but the national geothermal potential is 7,000 megawatts. Of course, the Kenya Vision 2030 calls for a target of 5,110 megawatts. Of course, we appreciate this initiative, which will help Africa to boost its development programs. We talk of industries, we talk of homes. If you talk about homes, we imagine our children, we imagine our people, our mothers can't do their work properly because they don't have access to energy in terms of, for example, electricity. But as we have the programs for solar energy, things are improving. But of course, we have all those challenges. And of course, I've mentioned the commitment that is there. We appreciate the world leaders, but internally, we also have to do a lot in terms of building our resources, Of course, using trade policies, we can look into, and we look into high cost of, high cost, for example, the capital cost, for example, of coming up with connecting solar, for example, which is also a hindrance to most of the African countries. So it would be important for the governments to come in and, and support in terms of access to energy, in terms of bringing out solar energy programs, providing support. Of course, here in Africa and Kenya particularly, we face a lot of challenges when it comes to renewable energies, and some of them are, like I've mentioned, the upfront costs, labor, access to finance, familiarity with the sector by the local banks and microfinancing institutions. We need to really understand about that. Maintenance, structure for the product suppliers, that's also another challenge that we have. We might have the solar item, but what if something goes wrong? What happens to the product? And probably some of the issue we need to do is looking into the looking inwards in terms of creating companies, industry to build some of these solar panels. Of course, problems are further aggravated by absence of robust policy. We all know we're weak there, and our governments need to support to come up with very strong policies to support our poor. You know, Ingrid has mentioned about taxation. We also looked into that. I must at this point also mention that the study also, I was looking at the study by ICTSD, because some of this, what I'm trying to mention is what I did some study from ICTSD. So I'm grateful, you know, for that thing. And to go forward, we also look of non-trade issues, and the first step is awareness creation. You'll be surprised that people at a grassroots level are not so much conversant with what goes on with solar energy. You know, of course, the initial cost puts them away, but a lack of awareness makes it even worse for them. You know, of course, and again. Quality assurance programs to, you know, function in terms of supporting our people in or rather having innovative ways of coming or being supported to come with energy or solar panels, for example, being trained, being, you know, all those are some of the things that are can help. In terms of reducing the barriers to energy, you know. Of course, we also have head of the pay-as-you-go. Of course, she's mentioned about even the program we have, the M-Pesa, where M-Pesa has connected with other companies in terms of producing energy where you pay and all that. Those are some of the innovative ways of coming up with ways of supporting our nation. I must mention also tackling renewable trade barriers, you know, and tackling them is, I mentioned one about creating a manufacturing base for sustainable energy equipment and, you know, generating local jobs. That's one thing that we need to look into. We also need to address, like Ingrid address the issue of high input duties for, you know, for these solar panels, you know, and of course the standardization policies need to come in to address some of these things. I think that's all that I can say for now. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Eugene. That's, again, very comprehensive. We turn immediately to Francis Johnson, and Francis is a senior research fellow at the Stockholm Environment Institute, Africa Center.
A lot of interregional and international trade aspects that play a pretty valuable role when it comes to facilitating the uptake of renewables, and also creating the technology platforms and the infrastructure and the institutional capacity. So we find some interesting linkages here in this shift to clean energy and climate compatible development pathways. It's a big set of issue with wide scope because it includes, I think as Ingrid was mentioning, it includes also all these goods and services and supporting aspects that go with renewable energy. It's obviously not just about trade or when energy crosses borders. So I just want to maybe pull out 3 issues that maybe some people haven't thought about that we have worked on a little bit. I'll put some emphasis on the case of bioenergy because that's where I have the more experience, but also because it's the renewable where both the raw materials and the supporting services are traded in rather interesting and complex ways, and this means it has a local and a global character. Some of the same aspects apply to the other renewables as well, of course. The first aspect I wanted to point out is that with renewables, and here I don't mean large hydro, I mean the new renewables, the smaller scale renewables, there's a sort of chicken and egg problem in various ways, because when it comes to attracting investment and trade, we see there's this great potential in sub-Saharan Africa and in Africa as a whole for for renewables. But of course, that's on the supply side. And the question is, how do you articulate demand when you have very low grid access? And even in places where there is grid, you have reliability issues. So how do you get businesses and households to sort of articulate that demand and grow these markets? And how to do this, of course, there's a number of different ways, but I thought it's useful to highlight certain industries that can maybe move beyond this problem. And the agro industries are very interesting because they create this linkage between agricultural development and industrial development. And at the same time, they actually bring along their own energy in the form of residues. And this sort of solves the demand and supply problem at the same time, which is very interesting. And we're seeing industries like, for example, sugarcane or palm oil, and there's quite a few others where you can benefit from this. So it's an interesting example of maybe solving this chicken and egg problem as you ramp up energy supply and demand. And the second aspect I would like to point out is what is actually the reality of renewable energy trade in Africa today? And one question which might arise is, what's the biggest area of renewable energy trade now? It's not so easy to calculate this, and I haven't actually calculated it, but I suspect it's actually charcoal, which people might not think of renewable energy, but it is renewable. Of course, it's not necessarily sustainable. And how to deal with this problem is a very significant issue because it's expanding quite rapidly, and the impacts can be quite significant in terms of land degradation. And with population growth and urbanization, the demand is really outstripping the supply. So how to move this sector of demand into other fuels, cleaner fuels, or at the same time maybe to make this class of renewables more sustainable, which can be done through certification and other schemes. But of course, much of the trade in charcoal is illegal. And so we don't really even know how big it is in the first place. But if it was better regulated and better supporting policies, there would also be benefits in the form of tax revenue and so on. And it does supply an incredible number of livelihoods. Literally millions of jobs depend on it, although the benefits are not necessarily so well distributed. And of course, the situation is that you have people living in urban and peri-urban areas. They have no other option. So where there is no grid and maybe no LPG and no other renewables like biogas or bioethanol that might be readily available. So how to regulate this market and make the trade more sustainable, I think it might be the elephant in the room in certain respects when it comes to expanding renewables in Africa. A third aspect I'd like to point out is that when we look at renewable energy expansion and trade, particularly after the recent agreement in Paris, there's a tendency to think, the most important thing here is climate mitigation. But of course, here in a continent where development and energy access and related issues are so important, of course the relevance is different and in some cases goes deeper. And I can mention a few aspects of this relation, which you might call co-benefits or disbenefits in some cases. One is, of course, the health impacts, which Ingrid already alluded to, the health impacts of traditional biomass, which is literally killing nearly 1 million persons, and it ranks up there with malaria and HIV. So how to address the health issues? Renewable energy, this if done well, then you get this health co-benefit, which is obviously extremely valuable. And it's worth remembering that these impacts fall on vulnerable elements of the population, particularly women and children, or those that already have some health issues. And of course, another is livelihoods, which I think Eugene was mentioning several times. Renewables are more labor intensive than fossil fuels. In fact, the statistics here are pretty interesting because renewables the jobs per unit of energy can be anywhere from 50 to 100 times greater than fossil fuels or large hydro. So this possibility for green growth and green development is really quite significant, particularly for certain renewables and certain applications like solar PV and bioenergy. These two in particular have a pretty high labor component, and so it's also one of the few opportunities we can see for creating jobs outside of cities, because the energy services that are needed, they're in quite great demand in rural areas. So here we see maybe a potentially creative intersection between livelihoods, development, and climate. The income from creating small enterprises with renewables, this can supplement farm income or complement farm income, because it's of course very difficult to make a living from small scale farming. So growing this green economy is of course a key aspect. And then finally, I think it's interesting to note also that in addition to climate mitigation, we have interesting linkages to climate adaptation for a number of reasons, but really two main reasons, let's say, is those who lack modern access to modern energy are quite vulnerable to climate change and to the shocks that come with extreme events or shortfalls in income. So those who have energy access, of course, are going to be able to cope with these shocks. And so their adaptive capacity is much greater. So you're getting yet another co-benefit from increasing energy access. It's not just about mitigation when it comes to renewables. And another is that with the changing climate, you have some renewables that are affected both negatively and positively. I think Ricardo mentioned the case of hydro, which hydro in some areas with in dry years, the capacity will be reduced. Similar problem happens with biomass, that with less rainfall, then the productivity will be lower. And here you see an interesting role for trade, because since this is a geographical effect, in fact, these two might be correlated, let's say hydro and biomass. However, by trading with another region, let's say trading biomass or perhaps trading across the electricity grid, once it's better developed, then you can hedge against this problem of vulnerability to climate change in the energy system. And so again, it's a case where adaptation has to be considered as well as mitigation. So those were just really a few key aspects. Of course, there are many other issues, but we see a new role emerging for renewables, and I think the off-grid solutions have to be considered, as Ingrid was mentioning also, because there's just no way to scale up from 20 or 25% grid to 100% grid in a short period of time. It's not going to happen. So exploring these other solutions in the next 5 to 10 years and looking for this package of co-benefits, not just mitigation or not just health, but looking at the whole package is going to make the case. So thanks.
Thank you, Francis. I think I also want to thank you for bringing to the table a number of issues I wasn't aware of and I find fascinating on charcoal, as well as the question of biomass and how you have vulnerabilities there that could be, as you said, hedged through trade. So I'll move immediately to George Mungao Okonji, who is the Chief Executive Officer of OSAFRIC Water, Energy and Agricultural Conservation here in Kenya. You could speak from wherever you'd like, George, wherever you feel more comfortable, please.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm George Mungao Okonji, you have heard. Now, in the interest of time, I'll try to minimize my paper. Africa is the continent least responsible for climate change and most vulnerable to its impact. As global warming increases, extreme events like floods and droughts are likely to become more severe. Sea level rise will hit African coasts hard. Agricultural and fisheries productivity will diminish, and the number of undernourished people will increase. Those most vulnerable to climate change and poverty will become more even vulnerable. In this context, adaptation measures and early warning systems will be decisive for the continent's adaptive capacity, and funding to implement these measures and systems will be critical. In fact, warming limited to below 2 degrees Celsius still implies major adaptation cost for Africa. According to the 2010 World Bank report and to the 2013 African Adaptation Gap report, due to existing and unavailable climate change, adaptation costs will amount to between 7 and 15 billion US dollars a year by the year 2020, and will reach 1% of Africa's GDP, even if global warming stays below 2 degrees Celsius. Based on the current emission trend, 4 degrees Celsius, adaptation cost will scale up and reach 50 billion US dollar a year by 2050, and 4% of African GDP by 2021, whatever. Without adaptation measures, the costs and permanent loss and damage will be much higher. At the same time, access to basic energy services remains a challenge for many African countries, impeding their development prospects and opportunities to lift their people out of poverty. It is vital that such development takes place on a low carbon footing to avoid the lock-in of dirty fossil fuel investment at odds with the important global goal to keep warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius or 2 degrees Celsius over pre-industrial levels. According to AFDB, the costs of putting Africa on a low carbon growth path will grow the longer we wait, and could reach between 52 to 68 billion US dollars by the year 2030, on top of the existing other challenges to eradicate poverty and provide basic services to many Africans, such as health services, education, and infrastructure. In this context, African countries require immediate, new, and additional international public finance, in addition to finance provided by rich countries towards their development assistance commitments. Private finance will not meet the need for adaptation, as these activities do not offer high returns on investment, and on a principled level, they are induced by developed country pollution investors and would be inappropriate in any case. Public finance is also needed to attract finance mitigation in less developed markets to secure clean energy access to the poor. Now, to accelerate the energy transformation, we need to support renewable energy and energy efficiency in Africa. African countries faces enormous development challenges that are of primary concern. Increasing energy production and enhancing access to electricity and off-grid sources of energy is at the core of these challenges and is an imperative looking at the energy crisis the continent now faces. 70% of the population in Africa still does not have access to modern energy services that are efficient, reliable, and improve food preservation and transformation, vaccination, access to education, and health services. African states continue to rely heavily on fuels that are becoming more and more expensive for governments and households as prices and demands are skyrocketing. In addressing climate change mitigation and economic prosperity, the challenge is to ensure this expansion of energy sources can be made to the extent possible and in sustainable and accessible manner. This is why the United Nations is dedicating the coming decade to sustainable energy access. By 2030, renewable energy and energy efficiency must double, and all people must have sustainable access to energy. This goal is achievable. There are more and more national and regional programs supporting renewable and energy efficient solutions. Solar panels, energy, efficient lighting, biogas system, feed-in tariffs for renewable energy, mini-grids, and etc. And those initiatives are creating jobs, lifting communities out of poverty, generating revenues, and improving livelihood throughout Africa. But more must be done to ensure these policies and programs developed further and benefit the most vulnerable communities. African governments can and must lead the international community into a 100% renewable future, including by taking the following steps. Promote a universal right to the access to renewable energy. Access to sustainable energy for all with no impact on health, the environment, and the household budget should become a universal right, provided that policies are designed and implemented, not cosmetic. Now, with and for the population, implemented with and for the population, particularly the poorest and the most marginalized, to meet clearly identified energy needs by providing tailored and adjustable energy services with a long-term vision that takes into account rising fossil fuel prices and energy consumption. Number two, lower the cost of renewables by revealing the true cost of fossil fuels. According to the International Renewable Energy Agency, renewable energy is cheaper than diesel generators or unstable power grid connections, but their prices are distorted by fossil fuel subsidies. These subsidies could be used to incentivize the deployment of renewable energy if and only if policies and local development plans improve transparency on public energy expenses and budget as a first step towards a climate-friendly and pro-poor subsidy reform. Gradually redirect fossil subsidies towards pro-poor renewable energy incentive programs. Provide for equalization of renewable energy prices and access between the richest and the poorest people. Call on the international community to support the subsidy reform and the equalization policy. Support renewable energy feed-in tariffs and incentives. Until the true cost of fossil fuel is revealed, renewable energy and energy efficiency solutions require public support and action to ensure that they can be developed at an accessible cost, including for the most vulnerable communities. There are many possible public incentives and schemes, including the following: different types and mix of relevant country or region specified incentives, such as inclusively, nationally determined and appropriate renewable energy feed-in tariffs. Implementation of a strategy that encourages the highest beneficiary achieved mix-in a country-owned manner. Providing capacity building, technology access, and financing in accordance with the principle of CBDR to enable these mixes of incentives. Plan for an economic feed-in tariffs through available technologies that would assist developing countries to maximize the gains thereof. Promoting the current understanding through focused technical discussions on refits and other incentives based on countries' experiences, success factors, and challenges, and also drawing on experiences of some civil society organizations and other stakeholders involved in energy generation, transmission, and distribution. Invest in decentralized production and use of renewable energy. 60% of the electricity needs by 2030 will be off-grid or supplied through mini-grids tailored to the needs of rural areas. Yet most of the energy available today in Africa is produced by and for international companies for export and not for the needs of the local population. Investors are focusing on centralized power plants. There is high potential rural areas to develop energy supply, create local jobs, and generate incomes if and only if policies and local development plans are enhanced. Channel and prioritize investment into improved access to renewable energy services in rural areas. Improve institutional frameworks and instruments to promote off-grid or mini-grid renewable powered options through renewable energy feed-in tariffs. Define energy policies based on the needs of local communities, be it health, education, lighting, production, and so forth. Actively support the creation of local industries, manufacturing, distributing, and maintaining sustainable energy equipment. Now to conclude, I did not leave women behind. Promote women as drivers of renewable energy powered future. Women are most vulnerable to energy poverty, as they are often taxed with the most energy-intensive daily work. These women can also become the main drivers of the access to renewable energy for all, provided that the energy policies take into account both the vulnerability and the leadership of women in the promotion of renewable and efficient energy solutions. Ensure active participation of women in the design and implementation of sustainable energy programs. And conclusively, African states can set an example for the international community by demonstrating their leadership in deploying projects for development of renewable energy and energy efficiency using incentives such as renewable energy feed-in tariffs, building on and replicating the operational and successful projects on the continent, questioning and redirecting the investments by public and private stakeholders in the country, demanding shifts in official development assistance for renewable energy, demanding the provision of additional public funding to initiate this transition. we can change the world order by turning our backs on fossil fuels and making the choice of energy efficiency and renewable energy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, George. That's a good comprehensive plan of action. So we have about 10 minutes. Let me turn to the public first, and then I'll come back to the panel to see if there are some comments that you'd like to exchange on the various views that we have heard. So if I could ask you to please identify yourselves before asking the question. Let me start maybe here, please.
I'm Wei from Vampalambalis, and Ingrid mentioned one example. A solar energy producer in Tanzania couldn't compete with the fossil fuel light manufacturers in Africa, and this because of fossil fuel subsidies. Two solutions is available. First is to remove the fossil fuel subsidy, and the second is to finance providing renewable incentives for the renewable energy light producers. And this is quite obvious, and also at international level, there is quite a lot of climate funds, green climate funds, and then can be channeled to support such initiatives. And also, I think subsidizing or providing incentives to local industry and to develop the local clean energy industry in Africa can contribute to sustainable development by creating new jobs and also mitigating climate change and promoting green growth. But what is the real practical, whether it's practical or not, these solutions, and what is the potential obstacles would you face? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So let's take someone back there, and then I come back up here to my left. So someone in the back. The first person to raise the hand. Yes.
Good afternoon, thank you. My name is Toela, and I work with the Infrastructure Strategic Business Unit at the NEPAD agency. And I'm just particularly grateful that we are actually having this session because, as has been mentioned, NEPAD is involved in this initiative. But more importantly, I think moving forward, NEPAD has identified trade as an integral part of its work that it will do going forward. And so it's important that we're actually making the link between energy and trade. I think I just wanted to make 2 or 3 comments which the panel may wish to comment to. The first one really looks at the issue of the business models around renewables and how we can actually make renewables more affordable and more sustainable in the long term, because as has been mentioned, a lot of these initiatives, we're aiming them at the rural population. So how do we make it affordable for our rural populations to actually access this energy? The second comment is to do with how we can actually involve our academic institutions and our technical and vocational education training institutions a bit more, because obviously in terms of operating and maintaining the renewables and systems, we will need capacity, and that capacity has to come from somewhere. So we will also need to think about how we're actually going to get that capacity. And my last comment is looking at the issues of laws and regulations, especially in terms of independent power producers. You know, how can we actually adjust our laws and regulations to allow for independent power production, especially when we're looking again at the case of rural areas where maybe the commercial viability might not be to scale for your larger producers. Okay. And then lastly, it has already been said, but I think it cannot be overemphasized, is the idea of making sure that there is inclusiveness with respect to young people and women, not only as consumers, but as an integral part of the production and sustenance of these renewable energy systems. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's in itself, I think, an agenda that you have put forward. So let's see if we respond to that or we actually pick up that agenda as well. So there's the gentleman over here.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. Lambert Botha from Business South Africa. I want to pick up on the points mentioned in the previous questions. When we talk about urban versus rural electrification, there's a lot of urbanization taking place. So I want to steer the debate, or maybe the discussion, in sort of the urban situation, which then, if we talk trade and energy, brings to mind, have you in your studies looked at the level of liberalization in the value chain? Done a survey across Africa, maybe to see where on distribution, on transmission and production, and what's the impact on that once we get our programs up and running? I think it's an important issue. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Again, that's one more point on the agenda that is very good to look into. I'm not sure we have, but that's a very good point. And so let me just bring, because later I won't have time probably, two more issues that I think are very interesting. One is the trend on urbanization in Africa that is coming up, and then, as you say, any solutions on energy. These are more or less 30-year investments. It is durable infrastructure. They have to think about the distribution of the population in that time, and so we have to think about those issues. The other issue that just comes to my mind listening to you is we're talking about on-grid as well as off-grid solutions and so on. But we know also that sourcing of renewable energy may require interconnection, so connecting the grid in Africa, and that's another big challenge. It's a big piece of infrastructure that maybe our friend from Nepal is also well aware of. So over here, when we come, the young lady in front of me is very willing to speak, and then we go in the back. Yes, please.
Hello, my name is Bilha. I'm an industrial chemist. First, I want to commend the program on solar energy. I have seen it being used in where I come from, upcountry, in the rural areas. Now, my question is, it's pointed towards Eugene, George, and Francis. It's about human excreta as a source of energy. I have done a bit of lab research on it, and I've discovered that as a fertilizer, it's very good because it competes with cow dung. And then also, human excreta can be used to make biogas, and also the biogas from human excreta can be used to produce electricity by use of turbines. Since Kenya and many African countries are facing many people are struggling, many people are in poverty, have you thought about it, or has it been discussed in any forum? Thank you.
Again, thank you very much for bringing that. I can tell you that in Paris there was also a bit of discussion on this, and there are people that are focusing on developing those solutions at a large scale as well. Yeah, just in the back. And what I'm thinking, looking at the time, is that I will privilege taking the comments and the questions rather than coming back to the panel. But I'll try to make sure we have a minute at least. But please.
Thank you so much. My name is Joseph. I come from Data Center Trading and Consultants here in Nairobi. Okay, the presentations are so good. I like them. I only want to find out something because much of the questions have been asked. I've come last. Much of the presentations, as I've been listening, they are skewed towards making a proposal on what we have to do, what should be done actually to redeem maybe our climate, or maybe the energy, or maybe to have sustainable energy in the country. I just wanted to know how far Kenya has gone. Okay, now that I want to begin with my own region, Kenya as a country, on renewable energy, how far are we? Are we just talking, or is when we are beginning? I wanted to get a point there. Or maybe I delayed outside and I didn't get it. Please emphasize I want to get it. That one actually is also boiling down to the issue of implementation on the side of renewable energy. you'll one day hear, like we visit the ASK shows here and there, you find there is biogas here, somebody has invented. You find here somebody has this kind of energy here and there. So you find that, I don't know if there is any policy or there is a way that we can come up so that we have these people centralized together, or through maybe the ministry, we bring them together so that we can benefit this knowledge. And maybe it will be cheaper than what we are putting on table. And two, and finally, I want, as much as we are trying to escape this area of the fuel, that's petrol, it's still on market, we are still using it. And I just wanted to know something about the pricing. Is OPEC still in force, or it still is not in force? And to what level does it control actually all the prices up to the consumer, or it just controls up to the country level? Because I'm made to understand that the petrol, the crude oil that we receive at Changamwe Oil Factory Industries in Mombasa is costing something to do with 25 shillings a liter. After refining, of course, our machines never change. Year come, year go. It's supposed to go maybe at 40 or 35, but now it's at 100. Worse still, when you go to Uganda, where this fuel or this petrol has passed through the land of Kenya to travel to Uganda, you find it cheaper than Kenya. What is up? Thank you.
Okay. 3 more interventions very quickly, and that's it, and when we close. We have a lady here in front, and then, why don't we start with you? You get the microphone, and then we come back here.
Thank you very much. My name is Matambito.
And we need to be very brief, I'm sorry.
Yeah, from Nairobi. I wanted to ask about, maybe Eugene can answer this, in terms of the sustainability. I believe most of these are clean energy. The drive is normally focused towards donor funding. We have not made the government to own it like Asia, where you see that a country like India and China, the government is the one which is really pushing. If it comes to renewable energy in Africa, mostly in Kenya, we have to wait somewhere to see that the program is funded by USAID, NORAD, and any other agency. Have you tried to put the government to be at the forefront actually to propel this change? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Annette from Mother and Child TV. My first statement is this, that we in Africa, we need to involve the new digital media, which is very affordable. For Kenya shillings 500,000, you will have 30 days messages and 6 appearances per day. That is very cost effective and affordable. Number 2, we need to have youth programs, because youth is the future. 50 years to come, we need to have a favorable climate. So we need to have youths and schools involved in the programs. We also need to have, I want to support the proposal that women need to be the key drivers. Yes, we can do that. And particularly in Kenya, if we take Kenya as an example, we have existing women movements, chamas that are very successful, and they just need to be given the messages and the funding that is necessary. The networks are already there. Yes, they can drive it. And then the key major question is the funding. Is it available? Because it can actually be done. Thank you.
Thank you. Last in the back. And,
Thank you so much. My name is Violet Nyando from Nairobi. I work for a national farm organization. I just want to echo what Ingrid said when we talk about promoting the use of renewable energy in Africa. And from where I sit, we have seen a huge potential in the uptake of biogas as one of the renewable energy initiatives. But the main challenge that we are facing is that when it comes to the appliances associated with utilizing the biogas, for example, the stoves, the lighting system, they're very expensive by the fact that there's a tax that is normally, put when it comes to procuring some of these appliances, and it cuts across the board. Even industries that are engaged in cogeneration of energy for purposes of reducing the the consumption of electricity at their operational level, you realize that, again, they're facing a lot of challenges when it comes to taxes that are being imposed on appliances associated with this. So looking at the climate, energy, and development nexus, I think at the WTO, we can actually advise so that we have a tax concession or exemption when it comes to importing the appliances that support the utilization of renewable energy. And then number two, still in the spirit of discussing the relationship between climate and development and trade, indeed we can advise the WTO to sit together with the people who are engaged in financing climate to see how best we can incorporate these the people who are using renewable energy in the processes of paying for environmental services. It can be part of the initiative that they can take so that we appreciate and motivate them as they engage in, utilizing renewable energy. They can be part of the people who are paid through the payment for environment services. And then lastly, I want to echo what my sister from NEPAD said. We cannot overemphasize the training and education institutions, because we want to have institutions and human resource base that can actually maintain these appliances, because after installation, we know we need to have also maintenance services, and we also have to, we need to have technicians and people who can actually now carry forward or train people more on the use of renewable energy. So again, within that framework, we can push for support towards training institutions that support renewable energy use. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we made a mistake thinking that we could run this session with such short time. I think most of the comments and questions, because most of them were the sort of comments disguised as questions, which is fine. Add very much to the information that we had from the panel, really. But let me ask in any case the panelists to take really about 1 minute to choose one or two of the questions that have been asked and just very telegraphically respond to them. And I'll start with Eugene.
Thank you so much. I think much has been said out there with the participants, and I don't think I got much. I like the issues of institution of higher learning, but probably I also mention about, I should talk about the human excrete biogas, getting biogas from human excrete. For me, probably I'll have more challenge when it comes to that because of health issues. But I agree. I mean, it's something that can be worked upon. But I agree with some of the comments that have been made in the center. Thank you.
Ingrid?
Yeah. Sorry.
Okay, so I would like to say a few words about the question about value chain analysis, because that's actually something that we are undertaking right now in ICTST. So we're looking at value chains in the clean energy sector, and we have some preliminary findings. But just to mention very briefly that a windmill, for instance, it consists of 8,000 components. And they are produced, manufactured in many different countries, and so these are many components that cross many borders before they end up in a final windmill. And then, as I mentioned earlier, a windmill also consists of up to 50% of services, for instance. So the good news is that when there are trade reform efforts undertaken elsewhere than in Africa, that actually contributes to reducing the cost of the final good. So even if there's an import tariff into the African country, the African countries will actually benefit from efforts being undertaken elsewhere. Having said that, I mean, with the import tariffs of 15-20%, that makes a huge difference as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ingrid. George?
Thank you. I'll talk of the proposal of human extraction. Let me inform you that there is a study, an ongoing study for the biomass production of renewable energy using that stuff and cow dung. I don't know up to what stage is the study, but there's a study going on. Thank you.
And Francis?
Yes, thanks. On this issue, I don't work on this topic, but I have some colleagues that have worked on it, so I can give you their contact info afterwards if you like, on this topic of using human waste. When it comes to, I just want to comment on energy access in rural areas, because there's a lot of cultural issues wrapped up in this as well. Now, I'm not born here in Africa, even though I live here now, but I can just make the observation that it's not necessary to follow the model that Western countries have followed, where the countryside is depopulated and everyone moves to cities. It would be very nice to have a model where agriculture and renewable energy go together. And we're seeing some examples where this can work. Of course, it's not easy. It's always easier to move to a city in search of work, but to the extent that this can be done, I think it offers a different development model, and there's an interesting trade component as well. So.
Well, thank you all. Those were, again, excellent questions and comments from the audience. Many are, as I said, additions to what we said before. The challenges are really very big. It should be possible to respond to those challenges. I think one comment in that respect is the need to prioritize the question of providing energy over other policy agendas. We know that when you try to reach 3, 4, 5 policy agendas at the same time, then you usually end up complicating things. So is it about bringing in energy to solve the question of access, and or is it about manufacturing, again, generating manufacturing capacity and resolve the question of jobs? And of course, there would be co-benefits from any option that you take, but that has to be prioritized. I think the question of energy, as we said at the beginning. Then, in that same respect, when it comes to renewable energies, it's very important to try to understand for different technologies what kind of jobs are needed. And I appreciate very much the comments that were made by 3 of you in that respect. Now, we want to make sure that as you go forward, you have a plan of this type, which is a medium and long-term plan. There is a good provision of, obviously, of capacity and skills, and understanding, again, the kind of jobs that are required when you set up renewable energy technologies, including in the services sector and in with, again, state-of-art digital type of skills and capacities. But I'll stop there. I would like to thank you all. I'd like to thank the panel for their excellent participation, and the audience for the very good comments. And I hope that we can come back to this discussion with more information as we move forward. Thank you very much.